The meeting is resumed. We are in public session, and we now consider the general scheme of the Dublin Docklands Development Authority's Dissolution Bill 2014 with representatives of St Andrews Resort Centre, Ringsend Community Services Forum and the Inner City Renewal Group, Dublin City Council Forum and the Dublin Docklands Community Liaison Committee. Is this agreed? I'd like to welcome the following witnesses from St Andrews Resort Centre. Betty Ash and Dolores is here. Ringsend Community Forum has yet to arrive, but Peter Dowling when he's around. Shawnee from the Inner City Renewal Group and our colleague Mr. Robert Moss from the Dublin City Council Community Forum and our colleagues. And Robert, you're making the submission. And Francis Corr and Tony from McDonald from the Dublin Docklands Community Liaison Committee. Thank you for your attendance here today. I'm supposed that we hear the witness in the order I've just announced them. Is this agreed? I wish to draw to your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to particular matters and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter to those proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect parliamentary practice to that effect. Where possible, you should not criticise nor make charges against any persons or entities by name in such a way as to make him or her to be identifiable. I also wish to advise you that the opening statements and any other documents you have submitted to the committee will be published on the committee's website after this meeting. Members are reminded of long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment or criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or officials either by name or in such a way to make him or her identifiable. We are examining the general scheme of the Dublin Docklands Development Authority Dissolution Bill 2014 here today. We have already considered this issue with a number of witnesses on our first consideration days and will allow us to further examine the issues that are important to the various groups operating in the Dublin Docklands area. This is a very important piece of legislation for them, and I'm very interested in hearing your views on it and the further developments in the Dublin Docklands area. I wish now to call on Betty Ash from St Andrews Resort Centre.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to address this Oireachtas Committee. We welcome the opportunity to have an input into the draft bill of dissolution of the DDDA. And while we welcome the opportunity to address the committee, it's also a sad day for us all here because we've served together on the Council of DDDA for the past 17 years. The model we operated through the master plan was groundbreaking and a complete new, fresh way of achieving regeneration, both social and economic. It was the first time in the history of this state to facilitate local community involvement in decision-making which affected local communities. The successes in education, training, investment in community infrastructure, social affordable housing and employment were achieved through this model and through cooperation by all stakeholders with a common goal of regeneration of Docklands. This brand new approach set a standard for the future of integration and ownership. In our submission to you, I covered the dark times of depopulation, downgrading and neglect of our Dockland communities. And the vision to regenerate the Docklands gave new life and new hope to us living in Docklands. Education for our young people and housing to enable them to remain in the communities they grew up in, strengthened our communities and gave people a sense of pride in being a Docklander. Expectations were raised and staying on school became the norm and acted as a gateway to access the high-end jobs for our own young people. It's important that these successes are not forgotten and the baby doesn't get thrown out with the bathwater. The new entity, proposed new entity, has to be guided by what worked well over the past 17 years. If we allow the planning to be developer-driven without regard to the overall Docklands area, it will not continue to be a sustainable neighbourhood for everyone living and working in the surrounding area of future planning of the area. It will bring us back to the past where social exclusion was rampant. The local communities want to see the remaining areas of Docklands built out. But we're very, very proud at what has been achieved over the past 17 years since the inception of the DDDA. And just to finish, I'd like to say Docklands is too important not to get it right, and we need to work at getting it right through proper consultation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Betty. As Ringsend Community Forum services hasn't arrived yet, I let them come in at a later stage if they do arrive. And Shawnee, can I ask you for the Inner City Renewal Group?
Thank you, Chairman, for the opportunity to address the committee. We've previously put in a submission, so they, in the short time available to me, there were a couple of specific items I'd like to address, and they concern the two trust companies which were set up by the Docklands Development Authority with the local community. One is the Docklands Housing Trust and the other the Docklands Community Trust. Both of these are charitable trusts negotiated with the Revenue Commissioners and the company's registrations office. The purpose of the trust came out of discussions and investigations that the community involved in the Docklands had done in other areas. We negotiated the 20% social housing clause in the Docklands Master Plan, and we were the first place in the country to do that. As you are probably aware, Chairman, that later became public policy under the 2000 Planning and Development Act, subsequently amended in 2002. The reason why we did this was because in discussions with previously with colleagues we have in the East End of London who are living in the London Docklands Development Corporation, one of the major problems they had and identified was that their young people could no longer afford to live where they were born and reared. And what we wanted to do was to protect the future of the indigenous local community. And so that's why we pursued the 20% social housing idea. We assumed, maybe naively, that those units would be put into the control of the City Council, which in fact they were, but then the City Council handed them over to social housing agencies. I'd like to make it clear that we don't have a problem with social housing agencies as such, but they do have policies which differ from the City Council, and certainly a vision that would be different from that of the community reps on the Docklands Authority. Some of them, for instance, sell the properties to their tenants. Now, the view we took of that was that if those properties were sold to the tenants, the 20% within one generation would be back on the market and there would be no long-term gain from it. So to protect from that situation, we asked that the properties be put into a housing trust. That was agreed, although many of them had been distributed previous to that, but it was agreed eventually in the early part of this century, and they agreed to set up a trust and put some of the properties, or the next properties that came along, into that trust. So the trust owns 72 properties. Our only purpose for owning them is to make sure that they remain available to the people on the waiting list of the City Council, and that the people who live in them get an appropriate service from the managing agents, in this case the Housing Association. That was the purpose of the Housing Trust. The second trust was the Docklands Community Trust. And again, the Docklands Community Trust was an attempt to perpetuate the benefits and gains that have been negotiated throughout the various master plans after the end of the master plan. So the model that we got again came from London, in fact from the Royal Docks Trust in London, where when the London Docklands Development Corporation came to an end, the remaining money was put into a trust fund for the local community. We had no guarantee that any such money would be left in our circumstances. So what we wanted to do was to build up a fund so that we could continue the work that had been previously funded by the authority. We had a target of between 5 and 8 million for that fund, but by the time the economy collapsed and the authority went into serious decline, we had got 1.32 million. Both of the trusts are designed similarly, with 3 nominees from the Docklands Development Authority, 3 from the community sector on the authority, and 1 from the City Council. We used the interest on the 1.32 million to support educational initiatives to help young people get into third level or post-leaving cert courses. We do it at no cost because we do it by distributing 20,000 each to the local employment services in Pearse Street and Amiens Street. Therefore, there's no cost involved to the taxpayer in distributing the money. The model of people that we, in the memo and articles of association, the kind of skills that we were looking for people to be on the trusts were educational or community experience, finance and investment, accounting, business and management, law, governance, social and economic development, or heritage and culture. So we've been very careful about the construction of the trust, the boards of the trusts. We're happy with how they're working, that's notwithstanding the fact that by definition their impact is limited, but we're very happy with the way that they're running. And we fear that under the proposed dissolution bill, the handing over of control of those trusts, the nominating rights of the Docklands Authority on those trusts to the City Council effectively means that the City Council will be deciding on 4 of the 7 members of the board. Now you might think that may make no difference, but the reality is that if the City Council controlled the Docklands Housing Trust, there will be great pressure on the board to pursue City Council policy, which is to sell the units to the people who are living in them, which would defeat the purpose of the 20% social housing and the setting up of the trust in the first place. We've never, on the community trust, the exact same arrangement applies. So we're faced with the threat. Now, there are possibilities within the memo and articles of both trusts to make different arrangements. But as we see in heading 8 on section 2 of the bill, all rights and responsibilities will be handed over to the City Council. So that is a matter of serious concern for us. So we have, just to conclude, I would say we have raised these issues with the existing executive board, and we hope to have further discussions with them. But if we're to take what's in the bill heads at the moment, then the situation will be completely untenable.
Shane, if you don't mind, could I just ask you one question in relation to the housing trust? Currently, there's legislation going on through the House in relation to sale of local authority properties and voluntary properties, because voluntary housing hasn't, as of yet, come up onto the market. Is your memorandum of association for the housing trust, does that fall under the voluntary housing area? So would that be affected by the new legislation going through the House?
Well, the Docklands Housing Trust is a voluntary housing agency.
So
yes.
you would be cut then with the new legislation in relation to the differential sale of properties? Or have you looked at that?
Well, we haven't, to be honest, I'm not familiar with what's gone through the House, Chairman. Obviously, we will have to look at it, but we will also have to make the point wherever and whenever we can that we didn't go through all of this just to have the property sold off and lose the 20% in one generation.
No, I'm going to say to you, very, very sympathetic, but I just wanted to make different. There's been quite a lobby for voluntary housing. Up to now, voluntary housing hasn't been covered by the sale of property, by the sale of city council houses. But the thing is, and there's a bill going through the House at the moment where there's quite a lobby to include voluntary housing in the sale of property. So I'm just wondering how that would affect your housing trust, and also just to make you aware that that legislation has already started to go through the House, that you might want to consider and make a submission at a later stage on it.
We certainly will.
Okay. Are you finished?
Yeah, that's
great. The Dublin City Community Forum, Robert, would you like to?
Yeah. Thank you all for the opportunity for the environmental focus group of Dublin City Community Forum, which is what we are, to submit a statement to this committee. Some general considerations for future Dublin Docklands development follow, which is, an area of interest to us. The regional planning guidelines for the Greater Dublin area called for an increase in the overall density of development, which will lead to a more compact urban form. By necessity, this leads to many more people living within the city without the amenity of a private garden or without access to any green space of their own. And we see that already with thousands of people living in apartment blocks. If we accept that there's a need for a more urbanized lifestyle in the future, then this urban lifestyle has to be more attractive in order for people to buy into it. And we feel that amenities like community gardens contribute greatly to the urban quality of life within Dublin. There's actually already a policy within the Dublin City Plan. It's policy GC16, and very simply, it exists to support the provision of community gardens and allotments and local markets and pocket parks, green spaces for people who live in the city. As the current bill calls for the cessation of the master plan from the 1997 Act, we highlight the importance of its appropriate replacement and recommend that Dublin City Council's own city plan is used for guidance for appropriate future developments within the Docklands. Urban growing by voluntary groups is expanding within Dublin. I rewrote this Dublin Guide to Community Gardening in October last year, and 46 garden projects approached me for a free listing. And this compares to only 2 community gardens a decade ago. There's now at least 46. So it's something that's growing in Dublin, and it's something that the people who live in Dublin want. In essence, what we're talking about is urban agriculture being used to rethink Dublin's public open spaces, and in doing so, improving Dublin visibly and strengthening its social capital as well. I suppose the silver lining of the recession has been the many community improvement initiatives carried out at a grassroots level right across Dublin, not just in the Docklands area. Often by people who have been made redundant, but who have skills and they have time on their hands. And they've used that time and that knowledge and that skill to improve their own environment. And they've done this without any direct strategic support. But a lot of hard-working groups and individuals, because of their work, we've now seen the creation of around 40 community garden projects across Dublin in the last 10 years. And these are delivering for us all environmental improvement, biodiversity enhancement within the city. They support resource use management and reduction of resource use. They improve and enhance our communities, and they're developing social capital. We believe that this is a kind of soft infrastructure that is too often missing from planning considerations, probably because it's hard to commoditize community development. It's hard to put a price on it. But what we are here to represent today to this committee on a modest scale is the intelligent use of two of Dublin's greatest assets, and these are unused land and unused labour. To conclude, future developments within the Docklands must have recourse to allow residents to interact with their environment through horticulture. This should not be the exclusive preserve of those who are rich enough to own their own private garden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robert. Thank you for your open statement. I'd like to call on the Dublin Docklands Community Liaison Committee, and Francis Corr, I think, is making that submission.
Chairman and members of the committee, we welcome the opportunity to address the committee on the general scheme of Docklands Development Authority Dissolution Bill 2014. I'm a member of the DDDA Council, and I and 5 others represent the communities of all the Docklands area. I was born and reared in the Docklands. On behalf of the numerous community organisations, groups, residents, associations and the entire Docklands area which we represent, we wish to make the following statement. The Community Liaison Committee at present consists of 6 community people appointed by the Minister as members of the Docklands Council under Section 16 of the DDDA. Since the establishment in 1997, the Docklands Development Authority has driven the social regeneration of the Docklands community as a key part of its mission. The representation of the Docklands communities on the Council has ensured that the opinions, needs, welfare of the local communities were always kept top of the Docklands Authority's agenda and enshrined in Docklands policy. And the communities are still determined to have that agenda maintained in any new entity which will emerge. The communities are particularly concerned with Heads 5 and 6 of the Bill. Head 5, which may not exclude any role of other state agencies, it excludes full participation of the Docklands community by diluting the powers and influence of their representation. Head 6 allows for the establishment of a committee which will be known as the Docklands Consultative Forum. The powers of this committee will be limited to assisting Dublin City Council discharge its functions. And at this stage, that's all we know about it. The success and the physical and social regeneration of Docklands thus far has been hailed worldwide as a successful and ingenious regeneration programme by many academic reviews. The DDDA Act says that it's the general authority's duty to secure the social and economic regeneration of the Dublin Docklands area on a sustainable basis and promote, in particular, with regards to persons residing in the area, the provision of education and training opportunities and the development of a wide range of employment in the area, and also to promote the development of existing and new residential communities in an area, including the development of mixed housing for people of different social backgrounds. These functions and groundmaking policies are not proposed in the legislation. The policies are not specifically enshrined in the City Development Plan either. The draft bill will not allow for the communities to influence the policies and strategies which have contributed to the sustainability of the Docklands. The direct input by the community representatives on the DDA Council over the past 16 years has ensured that the community agenda was kept to the fore. This includes the establishment of the Social Regeneration Programme, which embraced the entire community with a customised range of programmes, including community development, social infrastructure, housing, employment and education. Consideration should be given to allow a similar system to form as part of the new entity. Proposal in this bill would lead to marginalised communities in Docklands feeling further disenfranchised, and the consequences of this could lead to the Docklands becoming a less than pleasant place to do business, to invest and to live. Over a year ago, Dublin City Council requested the DDA Council to prepare a report setting out reviews on the issues that were still relevant from the DDA Master Plan 2008 and on other issues that are relevant to any planning framework in the Docklands. The overall recommendations from the Docklands Council were Right. A standalone planning strategy is devised and adopted for the entire Dublin Docklands area, irrespective of the individual planning mechanism adopted for particular areas within the overall Docklands area. An integrated planning strategy to be employed throughout the area. 2 was that social and community facilities and particular education facilities are to be provided in advance of and in tandem with residential development. 3, a formal mechanism is devised to deliver community gain from private development in the area. 4, a database is maintained for the Docklands area comprising statistics and other data for the area to allow effective monitoring of Docklands social and economic indicators. 5, national funding is sought to support the delivery of infrastructure and facilities, including community facilities in the area. And 6, having regard to those existing areas already developed and institutions that have been developed to date in the Docklands, ensure their continuation, development and enhancement in any future planning strategy. A standalone planning strategy for the entire Docklands area is considered necessary to ensure the Docklands vision is achieved and the Docklands legacy is continued. The strategy would provide a framework for other planning mechanisms, just as the SDZ planning scheme and local area plans. The contents of the planning strategy would reflect that of the Docklands Master Plan 2008. None of the above recommendations appear to be transposed to the powers of the new entity. Under Head 17, the Docklands Master Plan would cease to exist. So also would the policies therein, and this is of particular concern to the community reps. The Master Plan encompass a Pacific area north and south of the River Liffey and its immediate hinterland. The boundaries are clearly defined and stretch to 520 hectares. It was seen as an innovation space where all aspects of sustainability were developed, and a lot of pilot programs were put in place as experimental in the Docklands. And as Shawnee has already pointed out, 20% social housing was introduced in 1999, which led to the Part 5 in the Planning and Development Act. We introduced a local labour clause in the Docklands for the first time. Now it can be done in other areas, but we cannot have it in the Docklands in any future plan. There were many new community education and training initiatives undertaken in the area. The Docklands Dissolution Bill does not allow for the continuation of any of these programmes. The existing boundaries of the Docklands must be maintained, and also the social regeneration policies and the community representatives, so the work undertaken today can be continued, reviewed and quantified on a continuous basis. The regeneration of the Dublin Docklands was effective as a result of real participation and cooperation by the community representatives nominated to represent our communities in the Council. Those of us who have served on the Council feel strongly that continuity will be the key to maintaining this momentum, to consolidate the ongoing regeneration of the neighbourhood of Dublin Docklands. While it is acknowledged widely that the model of regeneration of Dublin Docklands was a groundbreaking model and many positive benefits have been achieved, there still remains deep-seated structural problems within communities which need to be continuously addressed. The groundbreaking model which framed the social regeneration of Docklands must be continued in any future entity, and we believe that the proposed bill does not allow for this, and we ask you to consider this in your recommendations. And this statement is made on behalf of the Docklands Council members.
Thank you very much, Francis, and thanks everybody for the submissions. Just before I open this up to questions to the other members, it's often pointed out all the things that went wrong within the Dublin Docklands Authority, but it's not often enough. It's pointed out the successes, and I think, Francis, you covered some of those successes, and Shawnee in the submissions. Certainly the trial and the test with the community came up with the 20% social and affordable housing. While it didn't achieve the successes the community wanted, it set out a template that could be followed elsewhere, and that should be recognised. And you also mentioned the local labour clause. But the one thing that always impressed me of the successes in the Dublin Docklands Authority was the successes that was certainly achieved from the schools I would be aware of in keeping young people into their leaving certs, and the dramatic change in the figures in the schools that I would have been aware of where only up to less than 50% would attend their leaving cert, to this year where 92% went on to do Leaving Cert. And that's one of the successes of engagement with the local community and the Docklands Authority. We could speak at length of the failures and the disappointments, but I think far too often we forget to mention all the successes. And certainly I would know many families that are living now in social housing that would not have been living there unless the 20% social affordable clause was put in. And it was a better success on the south side than it was on the north side, and that should be also acknowledged. But the template is there for it to be used again and developed in the middle of the housing crisis that we have. I'm just going to open it up to questions, and to start from my right, Senator Keane.
Bias against independence again.
Huh?
I'm joking.
No, thank you, and thank you for coming, and the Dublin Docklands, and of course, as the Cardiff said, I want to agree with him. We don't often hear about the good things, but I think the people who we have here before us today, I think they bring all good with them, because the bad things that happened weren't related to the community, really. So I think, that should be said as well. One thing I would say, and I've listened very carefully to all the presentations, is that what you have there at the moment in community development and education has to continue and must continue, and there must be a way found. Now, I know with the new community and integrated into the county councils, it's happening all over Ireland, that a lot of the community programmes and integration, but it is one thing that when we are discussing the bill to ensure, representation. Now, obviously, how it's going to work out, but you can't say, and it can't happen, that there won't be any community representation, because you've invested too much into it, and community development as a whole has to be part of everything. And as you say, it can't be developer-led. It has to be grounds up. And I think Robert Moss said, or was it whoever said, the county development plan used as a blueprint. And particularly the issue of community space, community gardens, and even if we're only looking at our own carbon footprint, obviously some high rise, yes, for transport, but community gardens, plots, the agricultural plots and whatever. I know valuable land is valuable in the city, but every city here in Europe has found ways and means around developing community spaces that are integrated, that are overlooked. You have play areas, you have agricultural areas or whatever. So I'm listening very carefully, and it's all being recorded, and whoever, the notes that you have brought in as well, and the submissions, the brilliant submissions that you have made. On what was it? Yeah, intelligent use. Well, obviously that's heading 5 and 6 of the bill, and that's the one dealing with the community. And I definitely think, that it is a plan. You can't, I don't know who said, throw out the baby with the bathwater, because there's a lot to be learned, both with the good and the bad. And I'm not going to ask any of the question, did you hope and wish that it would continue as it was? I don't think anybody wanted that to happen. But what we have to do is take the best, work what we have, and ensure that it's not lost in the wash, as you said, whoever said it, with the baby with the bathwater, and the proper consultation as well. But I do think that's growing in every community now, and in every development plan, and in area plans as well, that community development now is integrated, and proper consultation and a methodology laid down. And I do think it's important in this instance that it happens, if you like, as well, by the book, and stated how it's going to happen. I think that's important, because if you go off on a wing and a prayer and hope it happens, that there is a methodology stated for the integration and the community. Thanks.
Thanks. Does anybody want to make a response to that, or will I move on?
You obviously listened very carefully to everything that's said.
Senator?
Thank you very much. Just I want to welcome and thank you all for your presentation. I don't live in the Docklands, but I work on the edge of the Docklands. I run the Abbey Theatre, so I have connections with some of you, and particularly Shawnee. So I've just a couple of questions, because it's clearly, and my colleague Senator Keane has mentioned it, I think we need to look, Chairman, at Head 5 and 6 as a draft bill around the idea, around the consultation process or the community involvement. Okay, that there is a concern from you all, from the witnesses, that the in-depth and integral community involvement particularly around housing, particularly around the community, particularly around education, might be dissipated and might disappear when it moves into DCC. And that's something that, Chairman, we should look at when we deliberate our recommendations to the Minister. And I think that's come loud and clear. So I get that. I also get, I think, what Shawnee has mentioned, and maybe Shawnee might have an example, maybe some of you as well, Francis might have an example. What suggestions for other nominating bodies, if you have a particular concern on the Housing and Community Trust, and the concern that DCC, Dublin City Council, would have a weighted majority in the nominating, and I can see why you might be nervous about that. But would you have could you make suggestions? If you haven't got them now, you could, write back to the clerk as what might be nominating bodies if we managed to look at, specifying nominating bodies within the bill, within the Act. We should, you might have some suggestions on that. And I have one question for all groups, and it's, forgive me, it's going to be quite simplistic, but it's important to put on the record. Just to give a quick snapshot of, or a quick portrait of the sense of the local community at the moment, in terms of whether it's thriving, what's the morale like, what's the sense of, because the word social regeneration is a word that's used quite often and very important, particularly the success story, but some not quite successful stories within the Docklands, north side in particular, and I'd be aware of that. I'd just like to get a sense, without going too long in your answers, as well, what might be the key headline anxieties that your local communities might have, that might inform us when we're continuing to deliberate the draft bills. Thank you.
Thanks. Shawnee?
Well, just in terms of the two trust companies, we have written to the chairman and the executive board to propose possible solutions to what we perceive as the dilemma. I wouldn't want to preempt what view might be taken of those suggestions, but clearly the proposal, the rather blunt proposal in the heads of the bill, is something which is quite disturbing to us. We would like to see, to be honest, we would like to see the continuation of the existing boards, and that we could change the memo and articles of association to allow for them to be self-perpetuating charities, with the same limitations and restrictions and oversight as exists in the memo and articles at the moment, and that they could regenerate themselves, if you like. The memo and articles are robust enough to prevent any possibility in any circumstances of anybody making any kind of good thing or making money out of the process. There are no fees or attendance fees, expenses or anything like that. So the only outgoings on the trust are the administrative costs, which are required by law, in other words, annual audit. And up to now, those administration costs were paid by the authority. In the period that we're in at the moment, and really certainly over the past 12 months, already the City Council people who are within the authority have been balking at those kind of expenses, and we need to look at other ways of doing that. But we are very happy with the way it's run at the moment. And let's see what comes out of it, but certainly if it's left as it is in the heads of bill at the moment, well, we would review that as being somewhat disastrous. In terms of the general mood in the area, I think, Senator, it's like in most communities, it's mixed communities. Everybody is struggling, but those who are lucky enough to be working are doing better than those who aren't. The great hope is that after the substantial educational investment of the authority, that we were, as the chairman remarked, we were able to raise the level not only to up to leaving cert completion, but the rate of attendance at third level went from 1% to 10%. The rate, believe it or not, in the period of that investment up to 2006, from around 99, the rate of young people staying in school long enough to do the Leaving Cert, went up from 10% to 63%, just fractionally under the national average. So they were great achievements. The last thing in the world what we want to do now is lose out on that and have a reversal of that situation. Now, we have asked the executive to look at doing, because those figures are from 2006, and we would like to know, have they fallen back in any way? We suspect, though, that what we've changed is the aspiration in the community, and that for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, people in disadvantaged areas realise that the way out of poverty is through education, and that it's very important to keep the young people in school for as long as possible.
Ready?
Do you pronounce it McCongle?
Oh, just call me Fia, it's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Well, maybe I should call you F, because that's all I can say. But you're saying you'd like to get a feel for the community. Well, Dolores and I represent St Andrews Resource Centre, which celebrated 40 years last year. Now, that was a very, very tough 40 years, and we say we're an overnight success after 40 years. But we cover all aspects of community needs, from the cradle to the grave. And over that 40 years, we came from a very, very dark place. The organisation was set up to address depopulation of the area, the demise of industry and traditional areas, jobs in traditional areas, which